Republicans do not view what's happening now, if you've heard about MTG challenging Johnson, and we can kind of get into the details, they don't view this as just preening. They know hardliners have actually weakened their speakership and normalized this kind of chaos for one party. Again, the Democrats have other problems. We've covered them, but they don't have this problem even with narrow majorities. This is a Republican problem that the MAGA hardliners normalized, just as they have normalized other failures and civic decay in government and public life. And once you do that, it's hard to undo it. Maybe you've noticed if you've followed politics over the last couple of years. Now a Republican congressman is explaining that the clashes over Ukraine funding and the way that the hardliners are willing to capsize their conference again could actually potentially topple Mike Johnson's young speakership.
Do you think he could lose his speakership over this, Congressman?
It's possible. I'm not going to deny it. We have one or two people that are not team. They're not team players. They'd rather enjoy the limelight, the social media. It's a very narrow majority, and one or two people can make us a minority.
It is a very narrow majority, which is why one or two Republicans can replay this movie for their team, to use the congressman's terminology. Mike Johnson knows how quickly things can change because he rode the last hardliner uprising into this job. And now, this is interesting tonight, he is kind of making the opposite type of arguments to defend his position in this new Fox interview, which shows he does see the risk.
How does this motion to vacate help win back the majority or win a bigger majority?
I don't think it does. And I think all of my other Republican colleagues recognize this is a distraction from our mission. Again, the mission is to save the republic. And the only way we can do that is if we grow the House majority, win the Senate, and win the White House. So we don't need any dissension right now.
We don't need any dissension, no dissent. So I say this to you as we start the week together, America. Meet the new Mike Johnson, anti-dissent, pro-unity Republican, who is quite a ways from the old Mike Johnson, who was cultivating support from those very dissenting MAGA members who rode that, as I mentioned, rode that uprising into power. Now, these days, Johnson wants to tap that history. I mean, they all lived through it. He's not denying it per se. That would make him look really bananas. He tries to tap the history to then inoculate himself against attacks of becoming a new McCarthy, a new establishment, no dissent Mike. And he's trying to use his dealings with the White House to show that he's still a tough partisan, grimacing at everything the president says. A recent New Yorker profile reported on this exact dance, noting that Johnson has survived thus far by convincing the hard-right faction that deep down he's one of them. I am a conservative hardliner, he kept repeating in press conferences and interviews. And as Johnson repeats that like some kind of new age MAGA yogi mantra, the actual hardliners are looking at the politics, and they know they can use this leverage, especially if they do not care about the impact on the nation, on governing, or even on their own Republican Party's broader popularity going into a high-stakes election. Now, Republicans can only lose 2 votes on party line issues in the House, and that drops to 1 when another Republican leaves their caucus in a few weeks. And that's where this story tonight is not just about politics. It's also about democracy and what the people actually want and said they want through recent elections. Because the whole reason Republicans are weak in the House is because so many voters oppose their agenda. Sometimes we talk about the politics and the personalities and the MTG and Gates and all that so much we actually forget why this matters, why we learn who these people are and follow what they do. It's, well, because they won elections, some of them watched the country go against their party and losing a lot of other Republican elections. And the public opposes this current Republican agenda, especially on women's rights and coddling Trump's extremism, which was well documented in what you see on your screen and what we all remember. The Republican fizzle in the last national election, the midterms. Had the Republicans simply generated the usual swing that you get after a presidential race like that, most historical trends, they would have 20-plus seat edge. None of this would be happening right now. The talk about 2 or 3 people capsizing the majority, etc. And yet this is what's interesting here. Instead of responding to the public as another election looms, some of these Republicans are driving into the kind of chaos and extreme positions and hijacking of what you might call collaborative governance, which could actually cost their own party control of the whole House. And that's not just an observation, although it is an observation, but it's also something that more and more Republicans are discussing in public because they cannot find a way to get their party to get back to what Mike Johnson called for, no dissent unity, or even just any kind of civic collaboration. I know that's not how they do things. Well, now a top Republican calling out this problem and the obvious mistake of committing to chaos without a plan.
Unfortunately, the Chaos Caucus has continued to want to stop everything that occurs in Congress. It's not as if they have an alternative plan. We can have radical fringes, even radical individuals who don't really have an ideology or an agenda other than chaos, that can cause disruptions. And that's what we have seen. That certainly makes it difficult for people who just want to get the job done.
That's a criticism and an observation coming from within inside the party. And that talk about chaos is important because how do you reason with people who don't have any goals or don't have any governing goals? There are real tensions within the party, ranging from foreign policy to the January 6th issues to how Republicans face this electorate, which rejects their big, recent, and effective crackdown on women's rights and family planning. Top Republicans have run away from that recent court ruling against IVF, for example. And hardline issue groups are actually now reportedly upset with GOP lawmakers just for bailing on that unpopular position. And there are some big groups like Heritage and a Mike Pence project that are taking up a different kind of sequel, maybe that's the word of the day, because they have a plan to literally, quote, rerun the Roe playbook and use that as pressure against the IVF issue, as Politico reports. Now, a majority of House Republicans know that being branded as Gates or MTG is a loser for the party nationally. Many know their party is losing because of this crackdown on women's rights. And that was true, by the way, before this IVF ruling that I mentioned. And then you have Alabama voters just powering a Democrat to flipping a seat there with a whopping 25-point edge after running on women's and abortion rights.
Marilyn Lands has just won the House district seat in Alabama.
A reliably red district in North Alabama turning blue in a special House election.
She made reproductive rights a centerpiece of her campaign.
It's a victory tonight for women, for families, for Alabama in general.
People are very excited to see Marilyn win tonight.
A lot of this is because people value their freedoms in the South, in the Midwest, anywhere in the country.
Freedom as an issue is not going away. And these issues are hitting states that could bleed out Trump's supports or Trump's support or even flip. Take Florida. They will have a measure now to protect abortion rights on the ballot this November. So they will decide whether to enshrine abortion rights protections in their state constitution. And that's a state which just restricted abortion to a 15-week ban. So the voters who come out this November might be different. They might be more motivated to use this November race to overturn that new abortion ban. That could shape turnout. It could make the electorate more blue. And there are signs we've seen that some voters are just not as psyched about Joe Biden as compared to, say, Barack Obama within the Democratic Party. So that could matter in places where they're thinking, do I want to turn out for Joe Biden? That's how politics works. That's how elections work. But in many states, over 10, in fact, they may also be thinking, well, do I want to turn out to speak out on this issue in states that are letting people have input? And in that sense tonight, this goes beyond just the sequel, reboot, Groundhog Day that I mentioned. What's old is new again. For House Republicans, it is reliving their Groundhog Day trauma over picking their leader over and over and trying to face down extremists who they say don't even represent most Republicans, let alone the country. For many voters who have told pollsters they're not very excited about either nominee, well, we can see if we listen that the old stakes are back. They are new again, and the stakes are high. Who makes pregnancy and medical decisions? Is it women with their doctors and their own families, or will it be government officials and unelected judges who will make those decisions for women? Who decides whether religious views should inform how you live? Do you get to decide that, the people themselves? Or do you have unelected men in government deciding for you when religion will dictate your life, your choices, your freedom, and lack thereof. Because the judge in that very controversial IVF decision did explain why he wanted to make these choices for other families. Quote, human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God, he wrote in this opinion. To explain how he got to this result, he invoked the book of Genesis and the prophet Jeremiah and quoted at length from the writings of 16th and 17th century religious theologians, as the New York Times explained. Quote, even before birth, all human beings have the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory. End quote. Well, I would say to the judge, you might be better served working in a church or a religious institution or talk radio or any number of places where you can share your ideas. This is America. Your ideas are welcome to be shared, and if you can convince people to follow them in a democracy, that's great. But should your religious ideas, however strongly you believe them, be forced upon other people, overriding their ideas, be they religious, secular, or otherwise? And if we're going to do that, are we going to speak plainly about it? Should it only be predominantly white Christian men citing a certain religion to control the freedom, the bodies, the IVF planning, the family planning of so many other people, moms and dads and moms and all the other people who might want to make their own family planning decisions? That's where we're at, which is why what I told you tonight started with Groundhog Day, political trauma. When you take it all together, lands on stakes that have to do with your liberty, your freedom, and what kind of country we're going to live in.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.